Good morning. Um, Welcome to the first in a series of three career webinars being hosted by the Institute. My understanding is most of the audience this morning is in Ireland. So good morning to you all. I'm in Sydney, so it's my afternoon. The first webinar is a series on moving to Australia. From the Institute today, we have Karen Lanigan. Karen is Head of Member Experience, has worked with the Institute, providing career coaching and advice to members. She's also the person who set up the career mentoring program and the returners program for those that took some time out of their careers. Karen's also had responsibility for CPD and events program. So to make sure that all members get the professional development they need to achieve their career aspirations. And we also have Dave Reardon. Dave, like myself, is an FCA and a guy who's passionate about people and their careers. He served as a chartered accountant and then has worked as a recruiter, working from newly qualified up to CFO and across all industry, finance and practice. Dave's experience in finance and recruitment has been terrific for members of the Institute in helping them explore the market, both in Ireland and abroad. There's myself. I'm also an FCA. I've been in Sydney since 2003. I came out here to watch a Rugby World Cup, and 19 years later, I'm sitting here, still in Sydney, but still very active member of the Australian Society. I've been a committee member down here for about 10 years. I suppose in my daytime, I'm an executive coach and team performance facilitator, but I've served with the Australian Society down here, which is set up to help all Irish accountants in Australia to connect with other chartered accountants and to support you with your CPD, to support you with settling in, to offer an umbilical cord back to Ireland and the Institute when necessary, and just to know that even though you're a long way from home, you're in a home away from home. There'll be a Q&A at the end, and please feel free to post questions and comments in the chat. But there'll be a Q&A at the end for anyone who wants more color on today's talk and presentation. I'm going to hand over to Karen and Dave, who'll speak about how the Institute can support you pre-move, and I'll talk to you again shortly. Karen and Dave.
Great. Thanks, Cliff. So thanks for that introduction. So as Cliff mentioned, I have worked in a number of areas across the Institute, including careers, and still do, but also now as well, I'm responsible for supporting members and engaging with members, particularly members overseas as well. I work very closely with my colleague Gillian Duffy, who is the global manager, and Arlene as well, who's on the call, who provides support to the Australian Society. I'm just back from a trip to Sydney actually, and I thought it might be useful just to kind of share some of the insights or takeaways from me, from the trip. And the first is to say that, look, my sense is, and the reality is that Australia is very much open for business again, and it is a good time to be considering a move, and there are good opportunities for members, and Cliff will take you through that in a little bit more detail a little later on in terms of Sydney. What I've seen over the years in terms of my role in the area of recruitment and careers is that a move to Australia can provide you with career enhancing experience. So it's an opportunity to gain more diverse experience. It's a large market with a wide range of sectors that you can gain experience in, and coming back, like if you did decide to come back into the market in Ireland, the experience is very much respected and highly regarded. And speaking of highly regarded, one of the things that really struck me, both on this trip and when I've travelled abroad with the Institute in general, is how highly regarded the Irish Chartered Accountancy qualification is, and it will absolutely open doors for you when you move abroad, for sure. As Cliff mentioned, the Australian Society is there to support you. There is a very strong Irish community in not just in Sydney but in Australia, and there is a tendency for the Irish to kind of, I suppose, stick together as such, and to support each other. And there's a really good, you know, kind of sense of community, was another kind of takeaway for me. And also the Irish and Australian cultures are pretty well aligned, so it is quite easy to kind of settle in and enjoy the lifestyle and the good weather, for sure. So just in terms of how we can support you before you make that move out, so as part of the career service, we do provide a CV and interview preparation support. So if you're thinking about, you know, that move, what you need to do to get yourself CV and interview ready, we can help you with that. And similarly, with your LinkedIn profile, because LinkedIn is going to be a huge tool for you in terms of leveraging your connections here, but also potentially kind of tapping into the chartered accountancy community, you know, in Australia before you move. We can also help you in terms of guidance around, you know, I suppose the types of roles that you should be looking for, you know, the type of experience that might you know, align best with your overall career, you know, plans as such. So we can give you some direction there, so that at least when you land on the ground, you have a good sense of the type of role or organization that you would like to work with. We also work with organizations directly ourselves, who are recruiting for roles in Australia. We've seen a definite trend towards that now. So in some instances, we may be able to make that introduction to a role and a prospective employer before you go. But if that doesn't happen, we have now some really good recruitment connections on the ground that we can introduce you to as well. So that, you know, that helps, I suppose, in terms of being, you know, targeted in relation to the recruitment contacts that you reach out to on the ground, rather than having to sift through what is quite a large number. We can also then connect you in with the Australian Society before you go. So and there's a good I suppose support network there, and the members of the society are more than happy to have a chat with you either before you go or when you land to help. And as Cliff put it, like, there is that kind of umbilical cord, as you said. Like, I like that description, actually, back to the institute. And similarly, we've really strong connections with the I suppose our counterpart in Australia, which is the Institute of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. So we can certainly help you with that. The other thing, and I think Cliff, you're going to touch on this, is around references. We can actually, if you need a copy of your membership cert before you go, or a letter of good standing from the institute, we can provide you with that, so that you have all of those all of that documentation ready to go, rather than having to look for it when you get there. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of, look, we're here to help you, happy to support you in any way we can, in advance of that move. So if you want to reach out to us, these are the main contact details. So for myself and Dave, it's just simply careers@charteredaccountants.ie. And then the contact for the Australian Society is my colleague Arlene, and we'll be distributing these slides afterwards, so you'll have those contact details to hand. So with that, I am now going to hand over to my colleague Dave. Just bear with me a moment now. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And Cliff, thanks for that intro as well. Hand up, I have never been to Australia. I'm probably the only person here, Arlene, if you haven't been. But what I'm going to try and do this morning is give you at least a list of thoughts and actions. Some are going to overlap with Cliff and Karen's commentary there, so I'm going to fly through it. I won't keep it that long. First thing I'd say is to set yourself up, if you're going in 3 months or 6 months or whatever timeline, treat this as a project, and approach it with that kind of mentality. Set yourself up a spreadsheet, multiple tabs, and start into phase one, which is kind of your research phase of the project in terms of your trip to Australia. Put dates and timelines against your key actions, whether that's kind of everything from booking flights, checking your passport, etc., all the way through to connecting with recruiters and so on. So have a hub, if you like, for your overall Australia project. Speak to ACAs who have done the Australian trip. Now, that's an obvious one. Everybody's going to be saying that this morning, but there's different ways of doing that at home and abroad, and we can go into that. Market mapping is something you'll do with any job search, and whether you're going to Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, whatever, every market is a little bit different. Cliff is going to go into that as well, but the market mapping is the same mechanism for any, and it's worth, we can touch on that and how you go about market mapping for, say, Sydney. Plan your networking connections, mind map and brainstorm. So rather than just coming at your networking approach randomly, as Karen has said, you know, be systematic about it. Look at who you need to connect with, and put the energy and time into that. A lot of that's going to be done online through LinkedIn, and we can look at that in a bit more detail as well. One thing I thought of is important, and will map well onto accountants, is to do a cost analysis and a cash flow analysis of analysis is a strong word probably, but know what you're facing into in terms of costing and where you're going to need cash in the end stages of the project. Try to connect in with others who are making the leap at the same time as you. So every year, like now that we're through COVID, there'll be a fresh tranche of ACAs who are heading over to Australia. Try and link in with them, you know, whether they're Big Four or mid-tier practice or whatever. Use that network within the institute to see who else is going over, and have coffee with them and check in with, see how their plans are going. An important piece of this kind of a project or a year away is to really enjoy it. Like, and it might be a case that taking a time out, seeing the Gold Coast and traveling Australia is part of it. Cliff will probably speak to that a little bit again as well. A lot of members go over and do contract work, you probably get a gap, and you might want to plan to have that bit of a time with it. Also, Cliff might speak about key jobs boards. I should be putting up here what the jobs boards are that are relevant in Melbourne or Sydney, say. But register with them. It's something you would do at home if you were doing a job search. I find it's a great way of getting a quick view of the market. And what you mightn't necessarily be applying to jobs, the jobs boards, it will give you a really good flavor of who's hiring in the market, what companies are hiring, what kind of jobs and titles they're looking for, etc. So good to get onto them early and get the lie of the land. So an initial kind of administrative list or to-do list, a lot of this stuff is obvious. I'm not going to read down through it. And again, the others will probably touch on some of this stuff. For me, the two that stick out here, and I think Karen might have alluded to it, is lining up your referees, you know, whether it's in your existing practice or a previous job, get them printed, written, check that they're okay to take a call perhaps from Australia in the months down the line, to sing your praises. And then your original certs and qualifications and proofs, if you need to get them from college, etc. You might need that backup printout for when you land over. We'll touch on CV review and tailoring your CV for local digestion in Australia. It might look and feel different. We'll touch on that as well, no doubt. And then understanding contracting is a big piece as well. I know that if you were contracting through agencies, and Cliff might touch on this, you know, there's portals, there's hubs, there's timesheet uploads, etc., to get your head around. And accommodation and passport and stuff is all obvious stuff that we'll touch on as well. So research the landscape. This is kind of early stage of your project. And one key thing obviously will be to register with recruiters like Wilson Select and Cliff, and raise a hand and let them know that you're on the way. You know, you can apply to jobs obviously and get ahead of that curve. Know your rate worth and your salary level in the Australian market in Australian dollars. You know, we'll get you'll have a good sense of that out of this presentation as to what a newly qual, recently qual, etc. will be looking for in the market. But equally, salary surveys will be useful in that regard. Connect in with ACAs in Australia on LinkedIn. As Karen said, LinkedIn is an important tool for you at the early stage of this project. And do make an effort to link in with a wide variety or some key members and key connections on LinkedIn. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. put down roots quickly upon arrival or even in advance of travel, get into societies and clubs that match with your own kind of background and that. Online events, Chamber of Commerce, Institute events, Big Four, breakfast talks. When you hit the ground running, it'd be great to, once you have your accommodation sorted, get into events like that, get networking, get speaking to people, and get that networking piece working for you. And then, as you said, set up the alerts for the local jobs board, contract and perm, review peer profiles. I think this is a good tip actually, because, and I'd even say this for people job seeking at home, if you go in and look at members who have gone ahead of you in recent years and who they have worked for, Macquarie Bank, for example, always being a big employer in Sydney, and what kind of roles have been held? Are they different titles? Have they moved into different areas? So reviewing peer profiles online on LinkedIn and where they worked in Sydney or Melbourne is really useful. And equally, regardless of what market you're job seeking in, building a list of target companies, the top 10 preference or top 20 companies that you really want to work for in Australia, and having them on your hit list, and understanding the type of people that they look for is a good action as well. Making connections in advance, an obvious point. Use the groups on LinkedIn, get into them, join them. Join the Australian groups, follow the companies, your top 10 companies that I mentioned, follow them online, and so that your feed is informed by their details and you're well informed when you hit the ground. Connect with your training firm's counterpart in Australia. So there'll be alumni and there'll be references that you can use, or referrals rather, and if you're in Grant Thornton, for example, in Ireland, like it may be a case that you have to leave Grant Thornton, Ireland, and then apply to Grant Thornton in Sydney. And I know many members who have done that. But it's one avenue to hit the ground quickly. Ask partners, directors, and colleagues in your current firm for connections in Australia and referrals. Another avenue that can be very powerful. Tell everyone that you're going. Just spread the word. Everybody in Ireland knows somebody who's an Australian in Ireland or has a connection. So let them know and set up a few contacts that way. Also, just mentioning, connect with 50 or 100 employees in companies in the market in Australia. What I mean by that is just with your top 20 companies that you're targeting, if you start connecting in with employees in those companies who they may be ACA or Irish ACA or Australian CAs or whatever, it raises your profile, it raises your visibility and your personal brand in advance of landing in to us. So again, it's just getting ahead of the curve. On your LinkedIn profile that you're going to be in Sydney or whatever from whatever time, and if you need to amend terminology or some key points within your LinkedIn profile, update that as well. And just get active on LinkedIn, as Karen mentioned, commenting, liking, and flagging that you're going to be there shortly. Connecting in with the Australian Societies, the Institute, and avail of any online guides, I suppose, on the Australian website, Institute website. And one good point, it's an obvious one, I suppose, but like the GA network and sports connections can be very powerful. Join in advance of arriving if you can, or get involved when you hit the ground. It might even mean, getting involved in an Aussie Rules Club or cricket or rugby, and again, might be something that Cliff went on. So last few points really: advertise your arrival, build the online network, follow the companies as mentioned, connect with agencies, raise your brand and profile, get active on social media. So across the social media network that you have, highlight your impending arrival as well. And members of CASI or the Young Professionals Societies in Ireland will have plenty of members who have done this trip that you can have a chat and a coffee with as well in advance. we mentioned securing a role in advance of arriving, which is very feasible in the current age of online interviewing. And there's a guide here on online interviews as well for you to look at, and equally a job search checklist of about 40 or 50 points, regardless of where you're job seeking. It's a good action list to step down through and make sure you're covering all bases. Different versions of your CV, different flavors, that's always advisable anyway. It's an opportunity, I think, when you go to Australia to, if you've been in, say, internal audit in practice for a number of years, and you want to switch into, for example, management accounting or financial accounting, it's a nice opportunity as you hit a whole new market to be able to do that. You might want to amend your CV along those lines. And equally, different jurisdictions have different types of CVs. It could be that, photo needs to be included, or it's a more resume style CV. So Cliff will probably comment on that as well. Just a list there of like top companies in Australia worth being vigilant of. I know in Ireland, for example, the Irish Times top 1000 would be a go-to if you're job seeking, just to get a live land, and equally the financial services one there towards the end. I'm not going to go through this slide in any detail because again, it's a lot of talking points that the others will hit, but just there as a checklist for you. Final pieces, a few key links for you there. The one that stands out, maybe the salary survey and the Australian Tax Office, and just backup support from your careers team in Chartered Accountants Ireland. As Karen mentioned at the outset, we're here to help in advance of your travels. She also echoed that the international, like I'm recruiting 14 years with Chartered Accountants. I see members who have come back into Ireland after their stint in Australia, Canada, America, whatever, and their soft skills have improved dramatically. They have huge kudos having been away, a lot of maturity. They've taken on extra responsibilities, and all this is massively valued in the Irish market. So regardless of what role you step into when you're in Australia, you can come back confident that it's going to really enhance your CV. But another final point is that you should enjoy the journey as much as possible. You get, at the early stage of qualification, you get a chance to take a time out and see a bit of the world. When you would have been conferred and watched the video telling you that the world is your oyster, this is the opportunity to really use the qualification in a different way. So enjoy it, and we're here when you get back. So I'm going to hand you over to Marty, I think now. Marty Devine completed training with Moore Stephens in Derry before moving to Perth, Australia in 2010. He's held roles in mining services companies before arriving at Mader Group, hopefully I'm saying that right, where he acts as Group Financial Controller currently. And Mader are a heavy equipment maintenance business servicing trucks and diggers across Australia, USA, Asia, Africa, and Canada. So over to you, Marty.
Cheers, Dave. So yeah, I'm currently based in Perth here in Western Australia. So we're probably 15,000 kilometers away from home, but we're probably one of the closer cities to Ireland, probably aside from Cairns and the Northern Territory. Maybe we're the closest. So yeah, I've been running catch-ups with the Chartered Accountants in Perth for the last year or so. Been here in Perth for 12 years, as I say, and yeah, it's going quite well. So I'll just kind of run it through a few points on my view of things in Western Australia, just on how things are looking over here. We're slightly different to how things are on the East Coast. We do things a bit differently over here, but I'll just run through. Being accountants, I've kind of focused on the numbers side of things to make a case for why Western Australia would be a good place to kind of set up home. So there's a couple of different probably indicators that show me that it's a pretty good time now to kind of attack Western Australia or any of Australia, really. To be honest, it's all I think, as we said at the top, it's a good time to come to Australia. We're now open for business. The borders are open, and it's as good a time as it has been for the last few years. And so just run through these points quickly. So the net overseas migration due to closed borders. So Western Australia, you may not be aware, but we've had probably the most restrictive border conditions maybe in the world, in terms of local restrictions nationally and also internationally. And so we basically shut down the whole operation for 18 months or 2 years, and that has kind of resulted in what you see here, which is net overseas migration for the first time in quite a long time. And we've actually had more people leaving than coming in, which is pretty unusual for a state like Western Australia, where we've always had issues attracting people, but now it's been worse than ever. So there are less people here than there have been, basically, is the bottom line on that one. And this then falls onto the unemployment situations. The unemployment situation in Western Australia today is that the rate in December last year touched on somewhere around 3.5%, and it's bounced back slightly to around 4% at the minute, but still sitting at statistically as low as it has been for over 20 years. So there really is a lack of skilled people here, and that goes the whole way through the finance sector, but also through all areas of the economy, really. And then just in terms of the economy itself, Western Australia has continued to perform fairly strongly through the pandemic, and we had a bit of a blip at one stage, but generally we've went pretty well. We're a heavy mining focused state, and so production across our key commodities like iron ore, gold, nickel, lithium, all these kind of materials have still continued to thrive pretty heavily during the pandemic. So if you imagine that the economy is still going as well as it has, we're fairly well insulated from any pandemic impacts. We're closed off the world. We've just shut down here and just kept churning away. And now we're in a position where the borders have just opened, and we're ready and open for business and waiting for people to come back to fill all these roles that we've been struggling with over the last while. So yeah, just to conclude on that, WA economy, as I say, is booming. And presently today, I'm recruiting for a payroll officer and a payroll coordinator role, and the salaries are on a par with what I received as a newly qualified accountant in 2010. It's scandalous what we're paying people, but you know, it's supply and demand. There is massive demand for these people and very little supply, so it really is. It's an employees market at the present time, so the opportunities are there. As I say, the borders are shut down after probably 2 years closed, and big labour shortage, and the economy is going pretty well. So all the indicators are there to say that it is a good time to kind of set up shop here for a year or for longer, if that's what you're interested in. So I think we've touched on some of these, but just doing a sales job in Western Australia, I'd say the climate here is fairly impressive. Summer it gets quite hot, probably 30s and 40s, and then in winter it's probably like an Irish summer. Really, it's quite mild. It's very bearable. It does get dark pretty early, which is frustrating, but that's very bearable. And the lifestyle here, it's an outdoor lifestyle with lots of outdoor kitchens and barbecues and things like that. And the scenery is fairly impressive up around the north of the state. Very impressive, and down around the south is probably kind of like an Irish climate where it's nice and green. It'll remind you through Donegal maybe. And then the CA qualification, which we've touched on earlier, it travels very well for Australia. Certainly, if I see anybody with the CA, an Irish CA, I'm all over them in terms of trying to recruit those people. And as we mentioned, there's a strong Irish community here as well. So not too much else for me. I suppose I'll just echo some of the points that Dave and Cliff made earlier around kind of paths to Australia. I suppose the counterpoint professional firm is an interesting one. That's how I got my role. I spoke to my partner when my training contract was finishing, and asked him to reach out to partners in Australia, which he did. And I didn't get a job in practice, but I got a job from a partner's directorship outside of practice, which was just ideal for me. So definitely lean on the networks. The LinkedIn piece as well is crucial. I would say it's probably it's an easy thing to do, but it's just crucial. You know, if I get a CV, the first thing I do is head up LinkedIn and see if this person knows anybody that I know, because a phone call to somebody to say, what is this person really like, that's worth 100 times a reference or 100 times what's written on the CV. It really is the best way to kind of verify if somebody's any good. And if you're not using LinkedIn, then that's kind of a flag to me that this person's not serious about networking and about kind of leaving a path where they've been previously, so that people can kind of find out who they are and learn about them a bit more. And then just the last point was just on the opportunity. I think the guys have touched on it previously, and I've kind of mentioned it, but it really is a land of opportunity. And with the amount of people available applying for roles is a lot less here. The competition is a lot less, and I think if you go in a company and you have a good crack and you have a good work ethic, these people get promoted. These are the people that are hanging around and doing quite well. Whereas in Ireland, you're competing a lot more. Whereas over here, I think it really is a good time. And if you're keen to kind of advance in your career, this is a good opportunity, good time to be here, I think. So that's most of what I have. I'll just turn off my screen share. And I'll hand over to Kevin. So yeah, Kevin, just a brief introduction on Kevin. Kevin's been a CA based in Melbourne since 1986 and has also been a member of Chartered Accountants Australia New Zealand since 1987. He graduated in 1982 from University of Galway, and did a CA training with KPMG in Dublin, passing his finals in 1985. Kevin grew up in Mayo. His wife Stephanie, also from Mayo, from the same town, and they moved to Australia together in the late 80s.
All right, well, now that I'm up, I'm putting a timer going. 5 minutes is what I've got. I'm painfully aware, and I'm seeing that more people are coming on, so that's great and welcome. I remember when I was doing what some of you people in Ireland were thinking about, coming here, but I'm painfully aware that I was doing that before most of you were born. But anyway, my experiences are obviously a bit different, but the one thing I will say is that I've seen a lot of change both in Ireland and here in the time that I've been living here. So I've got quite a lot of slides, about 14 slides in all, so I definitely don't have time to go through them all in 5 minutes. So I'm just going to run through them. They're really just speaking points and thought provokers. I'm not going to dwell on them, but they're available to the CIAC, to Chartered Accountants, and I'm happy for people to get them if they're willing to share them. So let's start with the nod to the very start. In Australia, we are becoming more knowledgeable of Aboriginal culture, and you can read through this in your own time, but basically I'm just going to say that speaking in Melbourne, among Wurundjeri and Burrung people's land, and it's part of the Kulin Nation, and I'll acknowledge and pay respect to their leaders past, present and emerging. And with that, we'll move on, but I do encourage you to have a look at this, and would say that if anybody should appreciate the connection that people have to the land, it's got to be Irish people. So that's just something to bear in mind. All right, Melbourne Society, it's been around since 86. I got here in 86. I know that it was kicked off around the time that I got here, but it was more often on and off than it was kind of constant at the time. We owe a hell of a lot to first Niamh Hussey and now Tom Malarkey in the last decade or so for getting things running again in Melbourne. And they've both been really good at it. And they've also gotten great support from their firms. They both work in practice. Niamh for PwC, Tom Malarkey for a smaller, medium-sized firm. And both firms have been very generous to us with their time and making things available. I'm standing in for Tom, who's the current head of the Melbourne Society, and he sends his apologies. He only gave me one message: Melbourne is the best. Just remember that. I will say as an aside also that those of us who don't live in Sydney don't really buy into this. Sydney is the Australian society. We think Australia is a very big country and that Sydney is just another district society in what is a big country. This you can read if you look at the stuff. It's just really to give a bit of an overview, really, that I have an immigrant story as well. My parents left Ireland in the 50s. My grandfathers both did the Irish thing of going over and working, leaving their families and working temporarily in the UK in the early first half of the 20th century. I've been here for more than half my life. More to the point, I was born in America while my parents were there. My wife's been here for more than half her life, and she's a first-generation immigrant. So our story is a bit different, but I guess if you want to talk to someone who's immigrated and knows what it's like, I'm not a bad place to start. Australia as a destination, look, it's a very big place. There are similarities with Australia, yeah, but there are great differences within it. The climate, the population, the density, scale, opportunities, lifestyle, they're all different. I guess we're focusing mostly on Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth today. They're all very different too, and I've got some slides that sort of touch on that. Overall, Australia is a great place, and I don't think there are any bad choices, especially if you're coming for a short stay. There's lots to see and do, and getting work, importantly, for a young Irish CA shouldn't be that hard. And I'd imagine most of you would be able to come here with the job. I don't think that people use atlases in school anymore, but when I was a kid, they did. And Ireland and Australia were on one page on a map. And people would think, oh, that looks close. Well, never fall for that trap. Australia is absolutely huge. It's more like continental Europe, USA, or Canada. The urban-rural divide is even greater than in Ireland. Country towns are very different, and farms are called stations for a reason. I'm sure you've all seen that they use helicopters to round up the cattle here, and the farms are massive. When I say country towns are different, they just look different. I mean, I'm from a country town in the west of Ireland, and the towns are fairly compact and they're all there. When you go to a country town in Australia, it just looks different because they're spread out more, and it's almost like they have houses in the countryside sort of on some of these streets and whatever. They might have a town centre, but when you get and look at the houses and whatever, it's really spread out, and it's almost like being in the countryside in Ireland. Whereas when you're in the countryside in Australia, you could look for kilometres, miles, call it what you want, and not see a house. And that's even in Victoria, which is a small state. Size, just remember that Sydney and Melbourne both would exceed Ireland's population, so they are bigger places. They're both probably, especially Melbourne, comparable in size. When I was looking at the stats for COVID, they're comparable in size to Ireland. So what we were going through, I'd compare it to Ireland as a whole. I've already done the 5 minutes, but I'll keep going and try and run through it quickly. Perth, Brisbane, and Adelaide match to exceed Dublin's population, but I wouldn't really say they've got the same feel of a capital city that Dublin does, but they are at least as big. And then there are niche locations: Tasmania, Northern Territory, ACT, far North Queensland, Broome and the Kimberleys in Western Australia. They'd be all great to get to. I don't know that you get to them on a short visit. And I wouldn't discount New Zealand. New Zealand is a really good place, but it is a different country. In terms of some of the benefits, qualification recognition and acceptance is a big thing. Work opportunities aren't going to be hard to find. It is English speaking, really it is, even if they and you might query that fairly often. Similar form of government and laws. They're all the work side of things. On the lifestyle side, the weather, lifestyle opportunities, endless travel, tourist opportunities within Australia. And also don't forget that once you're here, it's a gateway to Southeast Asia and New Zealand when you want to travel. Some negatives to bear in mind though, and there are some. Distance again, both within and from just about everywhere else. We are a long way, and that was exacerbated during the pandemic. The time difference with Ireland can make communications difficult, tricky, even if you're just talking to someone from home. And when I'm talking in the evening and it's morning your time, we're both in a different headspace. I'll just say that Aussies can be a bit insular at times. They're also a little too keen on Irish jokes at times. And interestingly, in my experience, the Kiwis aren't nearly as bad for that. Climate, read this in your own time, but extremes. There are extremes of climate in Australia. And really, there's probably no place that doesn't experience something from time to time. So, you know, that's something you won't get in Ireland, really. Animal attacks, well, you can read that for fun, but honestly, you'd be unlucky to get eaten by a shark, but could happen. And economic considerations, they're real. I mean, especially if you stay here for a long time. You know, cost of living to move back to Ireland, it's not going to be easy, and we have a session on that. And the Australian dollar does fluctuate quite a lot in value, and it can be weak against the euro at times. Maybe some unexpected things about Australia, just to mention briefly. The states in Australia have a lot more power and autonomy than any county or province in Ireland, and that takes a bit of getting used to. Australia is not it's not the same. It's just not the same. So as someone said earlier, be prepared to do your own digging and research into any place of interest to avoid major surprises. When you're here, you'll learn that CPAs are pretty important. They've done a lot better job at marketing than the CAs have in Australia. So they are pretty important, especially with the person in the street. If they know anything about accountants, they've heard of a CPA, not a CA. And that's really something that gets on my goat as a member of the Australian society as well. They've done a terrible job at their marketing. Benefits, they're important, and you look them up as part of your thinking of traveling, but your visa status is going to matter. Medicare is probably the one you want to care about the most, because like in any country, if you have to pay your own medical bills, it's going to be pretty expensive. So if you can get into Medicare, that's important. Aussies sound much the same no matter where you are, so that's very different to Ireland, but you're still going to hear lots of different accents because it's a very multicultural country. So people speaking English are going to sound like me, or an Indian, or a Pakistani, or a Kiwi, or an Australian. There's lots of them. Aussies themselves, they love lingo and slang. They shorten almost every word possible, and there are lots of words that have a different meaning in Ireland to what they do in Australia. But on balance, you'll cope better with that and cop on quicker than your average Aussie will. So I wouldn't put too much on that. You won't hear much about Ireland in the media here, but the internet's cut down how much that matters. But when you do, you're usually getting a report from either British media or via an Aussie reporter. So they get it wrong a lot of the time. I won't go through this slide. I'll leave it for you guys to have a look at. But I did kind of do something on Melbourne versus Sydney versus Perth. And obviously Melbourne's the one that I like. But, you know, Marty mentioned some of the things about Melbourne that I've got here as well, with their short twilight getting dark early. But it's a great place, Perth. And Sydney's really good as well. So I've got stuff there that sort of, you know, talks about all that things. And basically I've wrapped up the last line there, is that all three cities are different in many ways. Each has its own character, but all have things attractive to any Irish person. I've written notes on my speaking on that to say, and this mightn't be fair, but Sydney, if I was looking for words, I'd say it's flashy, exciting, it's out there, it's in your face. Perth, it's new reach. It's definitely smaller than the other two. It's remote, but it's a good place. Melbourne, you probably think old money, reserved, less showy. It needs to be discovered. It's not as in your face as, say, Sydney. You've got to find the things that are in Melbourne. And sports, culture, food, coffee, they're probably things that come to mind for Melbourne. But I've given Melbourne its own page. So I'll just, I know I'm over time, so I'm just going to touch, I'm just going to touch on the headings. The weather in Melbourne is good despite its reputation, certainly good compared to Ireland. It's a sporting mecca, and you can read that stuff yourself. Parks and gardens, Melbourne is full of them, and that's actually quite a big attraction. It is also, besides the sport, it's an arts, culture, music haven. Nightlife is pretty good. Maybe not the King's Cross in Sydney sort of nightlife so much, but the pubs for music scene are pretty good. There are lots of Irish pubs here as well. Major events, Melbourne sells itself as being the major events capital of Australia. And you wouldn't have to be waiting long for something big to attend in Melbourne. And I didn't even, I put the AFL Grand Final in there, imagine. Shopping and fashion is pretty big in Melbourne as well. They certainly put themselves on that. And also being a smaller state, we've got lots of good things to see as well, but most of them can be reached in a day trip when you're in Melbourne. So that is an advantage. I mean, if we're looking at Perth and Sydney at the moment, look, they have great things as well. And Marty mentioned the stuff in Perth. But some of those things, as he'd be the first to tell you, are a hell of a long way away. Particularly if you want to go up north to Broome and the Kimberleys. You know, you're talking big treks, because in Victoria, for an Irish person coming here, I mean, when I'm talking day trips, I'm talking, you know, you could be driving 3 hours there and 3 hours back. So even in Victoria, distances are big. So, you know, that's just something you get used to. I'm from the west of Ireland. I mean, many of us when I was a kid didn't go to Dublin because it was too far away. It's only 222 kilometers from my town to Dublin. You know, 222 kilometers, yeah, that's an average drive here on a Sunday. World's most livable city. We were awarded that several times pre the pandemic. So we didn't pick ourselves. So I might just be saying something right about Melbourne. And lastly, choice of statues. I've just put in an aside there that you might want to look at. I didn't actually put in the food, coffee, or the laneway culture that we've got in the city. So I'll add that and send it in the slides. And also there is an active Irish Australian Chamber of Commerce in Melbourne, which is good. I'm almost finished.
Really
apologize for being well over time. The elephant in the room was the pandemic, which did hit Melbourne pretty hard, but it's on the road back. And the upside is that Melbourne needs new people to start to come back, and there are lots of opportunities. It has suffered though, but it's not alone in that, but the city did do it tough. Why go? I'll leave this slide in here. It's more for the recruiters who talked about it. I think for a short-term stay, I don't think, if it's something you want to do, I'd say go for it. I don't think you'd ever regret it. Longer term, I think you do have to think about more things, but short term stay can help you decide if this is where you want to be. It's a choice for everyone to make, and we have a session coming up on returning from Australia anyway, so we'll certainly do that. Thanks, good luck. Sorry for taking too long, but just remember that Australia is the lucky country. If you do come, there are no bad choices, just lots of different opportunities. Melbourne is great, and Cliff, I will return for whatever time I've left you. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Kevin. That was very comprehensive. Martin, look, I'm not going to be able to, I want to make sure we get Q&A, and we've only got 10 minutes left. So what I'll suggest is, maybe people can reach out to me or through the Institute to me to cover off the market. So my part in all this is to give a market outlook. Probably confuse people at the start with my executive coaching introduction. So I've run and own a recruitment business for 10 years and been in recruitment since 2006. And, I really got off the ground with the Irish Accountant. Macquarie Bank was, someone mentioned it earlier, one of the biggest accounts that I landed in, and really got the Irish CA brand here in Sydney off the ground. But I'm here to cover off the market outlook, the recruitment process, and some tips that have been well covered. So if anyone has any questions, maybe they can reach out directly afterwards. Just to say, Australia, like everywhere in the world's going through transition. Wilson Select, we cover, we're doing work in Ireland at the moment with some of the banks. We're working in London. The whole world seems to have more jobs than people. So, certainly for accountants, I think it's a great time to travel. People mentioned development. One of the things we've always seen with people who've traveled to different countries and different places is the resilience that brings in that person, how they think, the perspectives they get, not just as a from their career, but their own personal development. It's highly admirable to people who travel and fend for themselves. It's highly valued by employers and other team members when you can share those stories and you've developed that character. So don't just do it for your career, do it for your own personal development as well. Try all of Australia. I'll jump in here to looking at a market, but one of the big things I wanted to get across to this audience that are sitting at home is think, if you don't know the answer, just be honest, but think about why you're coming here. And that's a very personal thing. It's a great place to develop a career, but you do need a visa. You can get a visa, permanent residency. You can do that with your chartered accountant qualification in Ireland. The South Africans do it. They come here pretty much with PR. If you come here with PR, it's a real career development opportunity. You'll get perm work and you'll be developed in that work. Ideally, if you come here in a working holiday visa, it's a great way to see the country. It's a great way to get a taste of Australia and a taste of different jobs, but you will find you're limited to 6 months. The remote working environment has really crashed that market here. And I talk mainly, I don't know Perth, but I know Melbourne, Brisbane, and Sydney. And, we're hoping the contract market kicks back up this year. There's a lot of signs saying it will. And what's driving that contract market to kick back up is just a shortage of talent in permanent roles. So we'll be putting people into potentially permanent jobs for as long as their visa allows. But at the moment, anyone coming at the moment in the short term is taking that risk that sponsorship might not be readily available. These things take time to work through the system here, and sponsorship hasn't been something as plentiful in the last 5 to 10 years as it was in the previous 5 to 10. Looking at a market outlook, the peak hiring periods, I'm breaking this out into the visa you can work on. So if you're only here on a working holiday visa, it's really contracts open to you. If you can get sponsorship, it's perm. A working holiday contract, you're safely at newly qualified at 50 to 60 plus super an hour. The peak hiring period. So what is contract? You're generally hired, you're generally overqualified for the job you're doing because they want you to go in and hit the ground running. They get you in at year end. Year end in Australia is June, half year end is December. Peak periods for contractors tend to be, in terms of hiring and interviews, April to June and November to December. We are seeing with all the transformation, some of this, the opportunities are limited, but with transformation and with the demand for permanent people, we are seeing some of the contract opportunities get what I would call more career developing. But as I mentioned, there's a COVID hangover here around remote working, which has hit the contract market. Permanent, a completely different conversation. Like everywhere, like Dublin, like London, we've seen an incredible demand for accountants from clients, both in finance roles and non-finance roles. I think it's pretty much across all industries. What I will say is the professional services firms, specifically the big four accounting firms, have really led the charge in sponsoring in 2022. So, you know, a very simple piece of advice if you're coming out of professional services is to come up and you're looking in that sort of career development, is to really consider getting the local knowledge through professional services. They're first out of the blocks to sponsor, and you get that local experience. But I do think the corporate or the industry will follow quickly. Just today we just had a big announcement on salaries. There's some incredible upward movement on salaries. To give you a small insight into that window, I came here in 2003 as a newly qualified accountant ex KPMG. The salary, permanent I'm talking here, was sort of 85 to 95 plus super as a newly qualified. It didn't move much during the GFC. The contract market did, because that's very supply and demand. Perm didn't, sorry, not GFC, in those boom times pre-GFC. It hasn't really moved till this year, and this year it's gone up by about 20-25%. So, you know, a number of clients have rebased their new qualified salaries. So have the professional service firms, and it's significant and needed, I will say. In terms of a recruitment process, I'll just cover this very, very quickly. The contract is really typically one interview, it's references. One thing I'd give you a big tip on is background checks. You have companies now that do background checks, have your transcripts. You're going to have to do police checks. You're going to have to do checks for every country you're in. Contract moves quickly. They do one interview. They generally want you to start within a few days of doing that interview. The background check can delay you or put you behind another similar candidate. So a big tip for you is just to have that ready. I will add, and people have covered it, like the reputation of Irish accountants in this market, both contract and perm, is outstanding. I'll probably say it's number one, with South Africans number two. I'm Irish, I'm biased. I put it down to the training, I put it down to the schooling system back there, and I mostly put it down to our characters. We're able to connect with people. We're able to tell a story, whether that's a professional story and how we have to communicate what we're doing at work, or whether that's just building a relationship. It really, the Irish reputation here is number one. They set the rates in the contract market. I personally witnessed that for many, many years when I did contract recruitment, but they also drive the benchmark. If you look around my clients, the number of partners in professional firms that are Irish accountants, the number of CFOs that are in mid-sized firms, big firms, divisional CFOs, all with Irish backgrounds, they're well and truly overrepresented in an Australian population, considering they've come from Ireland. In the permanent, it's probably similar to Ireland. 2 or 3 interviews. There's a much bigger focus on cultural values. There may be psychometric testing. Going back to my point about making a decision when you come here, if you're going for a career and development, that's a very different mindset to earning enough money to travel around Australia and have a good time. And both are good options, but be careful you don't set yourself up to prepare for a contract interview for a permanent role and vice versa. Look, we've covered these very, very well, but as I said, these slides will be shared and this is all recorded, so I'll just click through them. I will stop sharing my screen and jump into a Q&A. Arlene, if you could maybe, or Karen, open up to the audience in case people have some questions.
Absolutely.
And as I said, anything we can't cover, maybe email the Institute and one of us can respond accordingly.
I'm not seeing any questions there in the Q&A, but as you said, Cliff, if there are any questions, they can email them through to careers@charteredaccountants.ie, and we can come back or pass on the questions to the relevant speaker.
Aaron or Cliff, could I just ask one question, because I thought it was a really important point you made around the background checks, Cliff. Just to, like, what would that entail if someone was to try and get ahead of that?
So with background checks, they're doing everything from checking your qualifications through to your security status, that you don't have a criminal record or you don't have some sort of a, so, you know, transcripts, are important to have with you. References are important to have with you. I mean, the Institute provide one, even a character reference. Being organized around what countries you visited, how long you've been there is important. Silly things like having a DUI, it's if you've been caught drink driving, you know, it has to be flagged on these things. It won't stop you getting the job, but I have seen people say that they have nothing and pop up, and it does then cause a question around ethics that they haven't been upfront or transparent about it. I had an interesting one from a guy from Belfast who was an owner of a pub and nothing to do with it. He was just an investor in a pub, and the pub was in some sort of a brawl, and because he was the licensee, he had a mark against his record, and not being upfront about that actually put a question mark on the process. So I don't know, Dave, if that covers it, but I'm happy to answer in an email with people, but it is important in the contract market.
Perfect.
Okay.
The other thing someone mentioned is job boards. Get on Seek. Seek is good. I would encourage, you know, a lot of this audience may be people who are newly qualified and have only done the interview with the one interview before where they're working. People forget what they're good at. People are in careers, they're busy. And one thing I will say about the Irish is they probably don't sell themselves well enough. Compared to an Aussie and compared to some others, they're very good at really putting their best foot forward. You know, there's a lot, you've got great training, great experience. You know, dig into that and really put your best foot forward and sell yourself, because that's what you're doing in an interview to get a job.
Great. Okay, so I think if there are no further questions, I'm not seeing any there, Arlene, we might just wrap things up. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody who joined us, and also to our speakers today. So Cliff, Kevin, Marty and Dave, thank you so much for the various insights that you have given us in terms of the locations and market factors and considerations. You know, it's really clear that there are some really good opportunities, whether you're looking to move over on a contract basis or temporary basis, or indeed are looking for a longer term move. The other key message from today is to leverage the support of the Institute, both in terms of before you go, but also as well, hopefully you've realised that there's some really good support on the ground from our Australian society right across from Sydney, Melbourne and Perth. So feel free to reach out to us if we can help in any way, and you know, even just helping you in terms of making that decision, because we do appreciate it is a big decision. But look, thank you so much to everybody today, and hopefully that has helped in terms of making any career decisions. Just to call out as well, as Cliff mentioned at the outset, this is one of a series of webinars that we're running. We do have one coming up later on in the month in terms of career supports for members in Australia, and also then Kevin, I think you mentioned this one in later on in June, which is you know, for members who have been based in Australia and are looking to move back home as well. They may not be relevant necessarily to the audience here, but you may know somebody that this may be relevant to, so we'd be delighted if you could share the details. And look, thanks again to everybody for attending, and indeed to our speakers. Thank you.